Tourette's podcast is not a medical advice show. It's a show about experiences. In the course of that, we may talk about medications or therapies or stories from the doctor's office, but don't mistake any of that for medical advice or direction. It's not. Get that only from people or places licensed or certified to give it, not from a massively fun and action-packed podcast about our life experiences. Such as.
And I've always wondered, well, what causes Tourette syndrome to happen? I really want to be the person who figures out why Tourette syndrome happens.
This is Tourette's podcast. I'm Ben Brown. So this podcast is evolving in terms of getting it right. Whatever that means. But what I mean here is when I was getting started, when this podcast was getting off the ground, and I was trying to think of some ground rules, for interviews and who would be featured here. And I guess an early thought was that you would have to be diagnosed with Tourette syndrome to be considered as a guest, which I think was my not so thought out way of separating out who's going to be serious about this. You say you have Tourette syndrome, are you diagnosed? Yes? Okay, cool, you can be on the podcast. But then on second thought, that just sounded horribly unfair. And I really had to check myself on it because it doesn't capture the people who maybe don't have access to a diagnosis to begin with, or even the first doctor visit. Not everyone can access a diagnosis so easily. And, if you have the set of circumstances in your brain that produce a Tourette syndrome diagnosis, then you have TS, right? Whether you've been to a neurologist or not. And of course, we've interviewed people on this podcast too who are self-diagnosed because they just know they have it and they've reached a level of peace with it, I guess. And a diagnosis to them was not quite as important as where they were in their lives at that time. They know they've got TS, they've accepted it, they're doing the best they can. And so all of this was kind of an early thought exercise into considerations for the podcast and, how this can be as inclusive and fair and real as possible and do the best it can for the community. And one of the things I do before starting an episode, before I start to edit an episode, is I will pick a random past episode to listen to, just to hear, where we've been, if I'm reminded of anything, just a good way of priming my head. So today I listened to Vea from Australia, and I was having fun listening to her. And one thing that I guess has been increasingly standing out to me as I've gone back and listened to past episodes is that I'm not doing so well on diversity and different walks of life. There definitely is diversity on this show, but I want more. I want different walks of life. My story and my experience as a white adult male with Tourette syndrome, might be completely different than the experience of someone else who has a different walk of life, someone else with Tourette syndrome. Maybe not on an individual basis, but in general, it's obvious that people, with different backgrounds have different experiences and different approaches. And I need to do a lot better here in making that happen. The whole point of this podcast, at this point, is to create these connections and reduce that feeling of isolation that so many of us have. So the more diversity we have here in terms of background and different kinds of stories, the better. As I say this, I've already recorded the majority of interviews for this season, for season 3. And while there's definitely still work to be done on diversity, this episode will mark a first for the podcast when it comes to age diversity. I wanted to learn from some of our younger listeners, and I totally did learn, that is, when I got the chance to speak with Eliana. And I can't wait for you to hear from her. She's 10 years old, really excellent command on the topic, admirable perspective, and she also walks us through her experience with something that a lot of you ask about, comprehensive behavioral intervention for tics, or CBIT. We're going to hear about that in my conversation just ahead with Eliana. Okay, so let's give a lot of appreciation to a listener named Jennifer, who clearly, understandably, had a difficult time writing this message to me. But she did it, she fought through it in order to get an answer to something from you guys. So please respond if you can. This was not easy for Jennifer. She says, I'd really like to find out something. Back on season 1, episode 3, Melissa C. Water. She used to have a coughing tic. Is there any way you can find out something for me? I have the same thing, but the trigger is the word or someone doing it or thinking about it, reading it, etc. The sound or word triggers it, triggers the tic. Can you find out if anyone else has the same problem? I would love to find this out, but it is just hard enough to tell you because mentioning it like this is making it happen a lot, due to the fact that mentioning it makes me think about it, and trying not to think about it makes me do it even more. This is a tic I've had since middle school. I'm 37 now, and I do not tell people about it because I've had many bullies over the years. I just really desperately want to know if there are others out there who have the same tic. End quote. Okay, so there's more to Jennifer's message. Thanks for writing in, Jennifer. That cannot have been easy, but for me, thinking about my tics will definitely contribute to them. If I think about a tic that I have for some reason, I will definitely start ticking. I don't know that I have any tics that are triggered by the concept of them happening out in the world. Or, put another way, my tics are fairly unusual when it comes to everyday things, like the thing that causes you to tic that exact thing. And I guess another way of saying it is I have a throat clearing tic, but if I hear somebody clear their throat, that doesn't really, well, maybe it does now. I don't know. Thinking about it is definitely making me want to tic, but I don't think that's the norm for me. You, the listener, if your tics come off this way, like if you have a tic that resembles something that people do every day, and if the sight, sound, or even thought of that everyday occurrence makes you want to tic, send me an email at tourettespodcast@gmail.com so I can let Jennifer know that she's not alone. At the same time, you can take it to the Tourette's Podcast discussion group where Jennifer is active. She'll see a response, and even though this one has to be frustrating and maybe even painful for her to think about, I think it's significant that she's fighting through it and writing in to hear from you guys to learn who else tics in a similar way. Thanks to everybody in the discussion group on Facebook who responded to Luana's question from last week about stimming. It turns out some people turn to Google to learn what stimming is, and it's essentially repetitive movements or repetitive things that you do that you find comforting in some way. Kind of a generic way to say it, but we definitely have listeners who, and I'm going to keep their names off of it since the responses were done within the discussion group, which is a closed discussion group for a reason, but we had listeners weigh in on this. One of them says, I stim sometimes, especially when very anxious or my tics or sensory issues are bad. It's a repetitive movement like rocking. It's voluntary, but I feel a desire to do it so that my body can work off extra energy when too many different tic urges / sensory issues / anxiety become overwhelming. The repetitiveness and motion feels comforting. Okay, so that's from one listener. We got another one who says, I find it hard to tell if I'm stimming or if it's a tic. I was rocking in a doctor's office and they were like, why are you doing that? And I was like, I don't know. I haven't noticed it. I was in an uncomfortable situation and started rocking and rubbing my legs. I was like, oh, this is a stim. Then I couldn't stop. Now I don't really know. End quote. Okay. I like this one from a listener who says, I finally Googled stimming. I do several of the examples that were listed, but I thought they were tics. I've learned so much since this podcast started. End quote. Thank you. One more. This listener says, mine is almost always humming, especially when I'm most anxious, or repeating a certain phrase to myself. But when I was a kid, whenever I was anxious, I would bite my skin around my fingers or hands. I thought it was a tic, but now I think it might have been stimming without having a word for it. End quote. And I've had a few responses via email that are pretty similar to these. Anyway, love how this whole thing behaves like a conversation. Someone poses the question on the podcast, and then people all around the world really are providing answers. It's a conversation, and the discussion group is the perfect place to have it. That's on Facebook. Thank you, Sophia, for maintaining the group. You're the best. And some more stuff. Basically, right now, this is a really good problem to have. I think that we're getting more feedback and more questions and more comments for the podcast than I can actually fit into an episode without making it super duper long, which I think is where the conversation piece comes in. We can have a conversation over email. You can go to the discussion group. There's a lot of cool stuff that comes out of this. But I do have to put a limit on things here on the podcast, just in terms of running time, which I think you can understand. And to that end, we're just about to get to Eliana, which I'm so excited about. Last thing I'm going to say, I mentioned this in episode 0 of this season, and thank you to the people who said go for it. What I'm talking about is a new way to support the show if you would like. This is totally 1,000,000% voluntary, no pressure at all. It's a Patreon page that I've set up for people who do want to support the show with small donations. Patreon.com/Tourette's podcast. This is just to help things along, cover the hosting fees and other production costs, as it does take some time and resources to make this show. And I promise to always keep it free for everyone to listen to without commercials. That's the goal. No sponsorships or anything like that. But to support the cause, you can personally contribute. You don't have to. There's no pressure. And I know that not everybody's even in a position to contribute like that. But if you do want to express your thanks in such a way, or if you want to do it on behalf of somebody else, like, make a donation in somebody's name, then I promise you that donation will be used responsibly. It'll help. It'll keep the podcast fueled, and you can know that you're helping other people who get something out of listening to this show. So I hope that doesn't sound lame. I just want to say thank you all the same for all the support in any form it's taken now that we're in season 3. Okay, Eliana, what a good time I had talking with her. Shout out to her mom, Heather, for helping to arrange this. Eliana is really fun to listen to. You're going to love this one. She does have coprolalia, and because, coprolalia is just a tick. So I don't censor anything. There's no reason to, especially as we get a lot of benefit from listening to Eliana talk about her experiences. I'm pumped. Let's get right to it. Here's me and Eliana. So tell everybody your name.
I'm Eliana.
And what part of the world do you live in? Or you can tell us what state you live in.
I live in Ohio.
How old are you?
I'm 10 years old.
10. Okay, so I've been excited to talk to you. I mean, the podcast, well, first off, thank you for the voicemail, for the voice memo you sent me a while back. That made my week, my month. I mean, that was great. And the podcast up to this point, has pretty much only talked with adults who have Tourette syndrome. And it's definitely time that you and I change that and, kind of introduce a perspective that we haven't had on the show yet. And so I'm really glad we get to talk. First off, could you tell us a little bit about your background with Tourette syndrome? I mean, do you remember kind of the early days and when you were diagnosed and all of that? Just walk us through that.
So I was diagnosed with Tourette syndrome when I was 5 or 6 years old. And when I was diagnosed, I just thought it was going to be like a little thing in my life. I didn't think too much about it. It was just a little thing.
Right.
And my tics were not bad through when I was diagnosed to up to first grade, first or second grade. But when my dad had his brain surgery because he had epilepsy, my tics got worse because of all the family stress.
Yeah.
And so my tics kind of went a little wild there. And because of what was happening with my dad, we weren't able to focus on what my tics were doing. Mm-hmm. And so after my dad lost his epilepsy, he's fine now, so he doesn't have any other epilepsy. But after that, my mom and my dad noticed that my tics were getting worse. And so they took me to my pediatrician, and they said, we've got medications if you want medications, or you could, in 1 year, you could go up to Akron Children's Hospital to do a session of CBIT, which is an 8-week session to talk about how, or to help my tics by not suppressing them, but by doing a competing response, which is doing the opposite of what the tic is when you feel that the tic is going to come. So we decided to do CBIT, and my doctor was super nice. We loved her. And my tics have gotten worse as I've gotten older, but they're just kind of, they're really bad one day, and then for 2 to 3 days, they're there's nothing. Yeah. So it's kind of like a roller coaster.
I get that. Yeah, I'm kind of like that too, where I'll have, and it might be kind of the same thing you're talking about, where, if I'm kind of feeling good and there's not much stress in my life, then I don't have too much that's compelling me to tic.
Yeah.
And I say compelling. I mean, I kind of use that word in quotes, but I will occasionally, have these days where it's difficult at work, or there's some sort of stressful family situation or something like that, and that'll really, really kind of set me off.
Yeah.
And I'll start ticking, pretty heavily for a few days, and then it'll go away, and then I'll be okay. But so with CBIT, I get a lot of questions about that from parents who are curious about it. Does it work? Is it worth pursuing? And I mean, can you kind of walk us through what you experienced with
Sure.
CBIT and sort of what was the process like with you? What were your sort of instructions, so to speak? What kind of happened with you at CBIT?
Well, when I first went to CBIT, I was super nervous because I didn't know if the doctor was going to be like. We had never met her. We didn't know anything about CBIT. And so we went in and we didn't know what to expect. And my doctor was super nice. And the first week, she just asked me what type of tics I had. And she diagnosed me if I had tics or Tourette's.
Mm-hmm.
She diagnosed me a second time. And I had Tourette. And the next week, she said, all right, this is what we're going to do. We're going to take a tic, your worst tic right now, and we're going to do something that's the opposite of what your tic is, right when you feel it coming. And so I picked a tic, and we took what the tic was, and I told her what it felt like right before it came. And she said, okay, so what's something that you could do right when you feel it coming that you could do the opposite to stop it from completely coming?
Mm-hmm.
And so and it was called Dristy, where you look right above your eye level, like the middle of your eye level.
Okay.
And after, we had to do that 15 minutes for 3 days of the week. And after the second time, I had that tic. Like, I never had that tic again. I've never had that tic after that.
Oh, interesting.
And so it completely went away. And that was really nice because it was my worst tic. And it was an eye roll with my tongue trying to pull my eyeball down. For some reason, that's what it was.
Okay. Okay. So the opposite was you looking up.
Yeah. So I looked up right when I felt it coming. And it completely went away. And we just did that with every other tic. And not all the tics went away, but it really helped, I guess, bring my tic levels down.
Does that work with vocal tics as well, or is that mostly just for sort of bodily movement tics?
It's harder to do it with vocal tics, but you can do vocal tics. My doctor, she has every year, she has a tic night out, stands for Together in the Community. And she takes all of her patients and she brings them to a fun place. Mm-hmm. And we all get to meet each other and we all play fun games.
Cool.
And the person that I hang out the most, she has Tourette. And I told her that I have a really bad vocal tic. And she was like, oh, I can help you with that. And I was like, okay, what's a competing response? And she was like, try to swallow your tic. And so I tried swallowing my tic and my tic went away.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. That's amazing. I mean, how did that feel like when you were able to kind of conquer a tic that's been bugging you?
It's always amazing. It's like, because that specific tic that I had, it was me screaming super loud and it hurt the back of my throat really badly. And so when it went away, I was like, I guess there was no more, I didn't have to drink water 5 times a day. And it was so nice not to have my throat hurting and not having to have my mom in the car trying to cover her ears.
Right.
Or when my dad is in the house with me and be like, oh, wow, that was loud.
Well, I mean, going back to what your doctor said, where he said, we can put you on some medication or, in a year's time, you can go to this hospital and we can try out CBIT. Does that mean that you said no to medication? And
yeah, we did. We said no to medication. We didn't want the side effects to what the medication could be.
Yeah. And
so we chose almost like the safer route.
Yeah, I mean, that feels good. I mean, I've been on plenty of medications in my life, and it's, they haven't always, I'll say that they did a little bit more hurt than help. It's just some of the side effects were, they messed with my weight, they messed with certain parts of my body that is just, it ended up causing more, I think, harm to me psychologically than it did help, even though, it did help me sleep, it did help me get a little bit of control over my tics, but just not to the point where it was worth it.
Yeah.
So how are you doing now? I mean, are you still incorporating sort of CBIT kind of practices into your life? And do you take any medications at all, or?
I don't take any medications. We do still incorporate CBIT, but we don't incorporate it as much, I guess I would say.
Mm-hmm.
When one tick gets really bad, like super really bad, we go to CBIT because you can have like extra little, I don't know, seeings with her. You can meet with her again for one day. And so when my ticks get super bad, we go to her for one day, and we pick out a competing response. And I actually went to her a couple months ago, and we picked out a competing response, and the tick went away.
And so if I heard you right earlier, you interact with other people who have Tourette syndrome, is that right?
Yeah, I do interact with other people at my doctor's tick night outs, but I also interact with the Tourette the Tourette Facebook group. We kind of look around there sometimes, and sometimes we see moms that are looking for someone to talk to.
Yeah.
And no one's volunteered. And so we volunteer, and we get to meet their child with Tourette or the adult with Tourette, and we get to talk about it. And we get to help them through it. So I have someone that I'm doing it with right now, and she actually has the same name as me, Eliana. So
that's cool.
Yeah, and
that's cool.
we talk a lot, so it's pretty fun.
Yeah, I mean, I bet that helps too. Just in terms of encountering common problems, or just talking in general. I mean, it doesn't even have to be about Tourette syndrome. It's just the chance to talk to somebody else on a casual basis who has Tourette syndrome as well.
Yeah, we have a lot of things in common. She recently talked to her class for the first time about Tourette syndrome.
Oh, yeah. And I wanted to ask you about that too. I mean, I guess your classmates are they accepting, understanding? Have you had to explain yourself in difficult situations, or?
Yeah. At the beginning of every year, I go up to the front of my class and I tell my class about what is happening. And I started that in 3rd grade. In 2nd grade, I wasn't comfortable. But in 3rd grade, I started doing that. And now that I'm 4th grade, I've done it. This is my 2nd year doing it. And it goes really easily, I guess, smoothly, because I'm actually not the one talking. I have a YouTube channel. And so I just show them the video about me on my YouTube channel, talking about what Tourette is and what I have and other stuff like that.
I mean, I love that you're at the level of enthusiasm to where you have a YouTube channel for it.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really, really cool. And to get to that level of comfort, I mean, I think you said in maybe 2nd grade, you weren't at the level yet where you felt okay talking about it, but you were once you got to the 3rd grade. What changed? Like what got you to the point where you were comfortable talking about it?
Well, at the end of 2nd grade was when I did CBIT.
Okay.
And so I guess CBIT kind of changed my perspective of what Tourette syndrome was.
Okay.
And it kind of brought me closer to what it was, and it brought me more comfortable to talk about it, because we were talking about all the situation that were at school to my doctor. And we had, I think it was like the 2nd or 3rd week, and we didn't know her. I mean, we were just meeting her. And so we were just talking, and I guess that really brought my comfort level back to where it used to be. And I was able to, in 3rd grade, talk about what it was to my classmates.
I mean, you're in a really amazing position, I think, because
Thank you.
I mean, you have a level of intelligence about Tourette syndrome that I think a lot of other kids, and I hope I say this right, but when I was 10 years old, I was completely immersed in my own Tourette syndrome. I was completely terrified of it. I didn't want to talk about it. I was scared. I was turning inward, and I figured, this is just not worth letting other people know about because they're going to mess with me about it. And that was the life I lived. And that isn't. I'm jealous of you because of the position that you're in, to where you were able to kind of establish the sense of command over it and acceptance. And that came with learning more about Tourette syndrome, what it was, seeing it in its context, talking with other people about it, then trying therapies that worked for you, not just something that someone said, medications or whatever, like just take this and your tics will go away, or you're going to grow up and you'll get into your teenage years and you won't have Tourette's anymore. I mean, that's the kind of thing we hear all the time. And I think sometimes, and I've said this on the podcast before, I think sometimes that leads people to not accept their Tourette syndrome because they think it's just something that's going to go away. They don't have to deal with it anymore.
Yeah.
But you're getting out ahead of it. And it could go away for you or it could go worse. You said your tics have been progressively worse through the years. But
Coprolalia, yeah.
Yeah. And while I was someone who just kind of ran from it, you're, I think, just establishing a much better position in your life to be able to kind of hold on to it. And, if people don't understand it on the outside world, you're also in a position where you can educate them because you do know what it is. How often does that happen to where, maybe you're out in public or a friend of a schoolmate, their parents want to know more about Tourette syndrome, or just someone your age that you meet for the first time? How do you explain what it is?
Well, if I've had I've met them for a couple of weeks, and I've kind of gotten used to who they are, and I've gotten comfortable with talking to them. I don't tell them at first sight that I have Tourette syndrome. Hey, I have Tourette syndrome. I wait for a couple of weeks until I get to know them more, and then if I feel comfortable, I'll tell them. But sometimes in situations with people that I really don't feel quite comfortable with, I won't tell them about my Tourette syndrome until I absolutely need to.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely respect that. And I mean, do you find that that your way of explaining it catches on with people? I mean, do you find them kind of developing a sense of understanding of what you go through, or does it kind of take a little bit more than that?
At first they're kind of like, okay, and people are just, they don't really understand what it is. But as soon as I tell them and I get more comfortable with ticking around them and not having to suppress my tics, I kind of just let them loose, and they're like, oh, that's what that is.
Yeah.
So yeah, they do catch on with it. And if I have really, really good friends that I've had for quite a while, they, when there's a new friend, and I've told them that I wanted to tell them about my Tourette syndrome, but I'm nervous to tell them.
Right.
They're like, hey, do you want me to tell them?
Oh, wow.
And so they kind of stand up for me.
That is so cool.
They help me with it.
That's amazing to have friends like that who, they I mean, it's a credit to you too, because they've gotten to know you, they trust you, they and so much that they value you that they're willing to step up for you. And I mean, that's great. And I know in a sense that you don't necessarily need them to do that for you in situations unless, tics are really out of hand. But it's really nice to know that support is there. I mean, I know you're fully capable of being able to, to explain yourself and shed light on it as you need to. But it's really nice to have other people who can advocate for you if you want. Is advocacy the kind of thing that you put on your YouTube channel, or what do you do there?
Most of my channel is just, I guess, doing science experiments because I really like science.
Yeah. Cool.
But there are times when my Tourette syndrome gets kind of crazy. And so that was on my channel the one time in second grade that I decided to, tell my YouTube channel that I had Tourette syndrome.
Yeah.
And I don't know. It's an interesting response because I thought,
what was the reaction?
My YouTube channel wasn't very big. Like 22, 23 subscribers. And so my response was, I don't know what we're at now, but the last time I checked, we were at 528 views. And my mom took a video of me before we went to see the pediatrician.
Yeah.
And we showed her a video what kind of my Tourette's looked like. And we put that video on my YouTube channel just to show people what my Tourette was kind of like. And the response, last time I looked, I was at 15,000 maybe views.
Oh, wow.
5,000?
Wow.
No, 5,000.
That's good.
I think it was 5,000, not 15,000. Yeah, so it's interesting to see how small my YouTube channel is, and then to see how much people are looking for answers.
Wow. So the reactions, I mean, were they from people who I guess were kind of surprised that you had Tourette syndrome, or were they people who were kind of pointed your direction because they have Tourette syndrome too and they wanted to learn more about you?
These people aren't the people who were looking and watching these videos. Were not. I mean, there's probably a couple people who were subscribed, but most of the people who were watching were people who had just been diagnosed or had seen that they just got it, and they wanted to look at it and see kind of what their future could be like.
Right. Yeah.
And so I think that's why I have so many views on those, is because people are searching for answers.
I mean, that's so important and has led a lot of people to this podcast too. I haven't done any advertising for it or anything like that. Just social media, just word of mouth, and that's it. And I guess it's coming up in Google searches now too. But it's what you just said. It's people who, maybe they're brand new to it, or they maybe suspect that their child has Tourette syndrome, and they want to hear. They just want to tune in and hear about it and learn a little bit more. But of course, as we've already established, past episodes, it's just focused on adults. Yeah. And so it's when people are tuning into you and they want some perspective and they want answers. What are you getting from listening to adults who were in their 20s, 30s, or 40s talking about Tourette syndrome with each other?
Well, I guess when I listen to your podcast, it's kind of like a time for me where I kind of zone out and I just listen, and I guess I see what their time with Tourette has been like, and I see how many compare and contrast there are to what our lives have been like.
Yeah.
And I get a lot out of it because I see how other people deal with it. And I've always thought when I see someone that deals with it differently or same, I always think, wow, that person's brave.
Yeah, it takes a lot of bravery to speak up about it at all. I mean, kind of in one sense, it's nobody else's business, what you have, going on with your life, but it's the awkwardness of Tourette syndrome is that it's so often apparent that it makes people want to ask questions and they'll form judgments about you without really kind of understanding what the issue is. And I mean, I have, I guess, dealt with that one way or another in my life, even though I was not really open about having it. But yeah, I mean, it does take a level of courage to open up about it and be willing to answer people's questions about it, just because it's not always treated very well. And I think things are changing, though. I definitely think it's because I think of people like you having that sense of command and that sense of relatability that really does help people who turn to you for answers find a sort of a sense of direction on, what's the world out there like in terms of people who have Tourette syndrome growing up as adults. And it's just, I really admire what you're doing. And
thanks.
And going back to your YouTube channel, you said you're a science fan. Is that any particular kind of science or brain science, or what's your background on that?
I really enjoy just kind of experiment with things that are out of the ordinary.
Yeah.
And I also I don't do this on my YouTube channel, but I like to learn more about the brain.
Yeah.
Because
for sure.
I like seeing the differences because of the basal ganglia. But I really like the basal ganglia to see, I like to search on the basal ganglia about Tourette, people with Tourette, and people not with Tourette, and their basal ganglias. I like that. I don't know. It's kind of strange, but I enjoy that type of stuff.
Do you see yourself doing something maybe professionally down the line and that kind of thing? I mean, it sounds like you're kind of gearing up to be a Tourette scientist.
Yeah, I want to be the person who figures out what causes Tourette syndrome. Because there's no answers for that. And I've always wondered, well, what causes Tourette syndrome to happen?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so I really want to be the person who figures out why Tourette syndrome happens.
I mean, you could have your name on it. That's prize-winning stuff.
Yeah, it'd be pretty cool.
One thing we often hear about having Tourette is that it can make you really good at certain subjects in school, or you might have a really creative, good sense of, music or art, and that's kind of my side of the brain.
Mm-hmm.
When it comes to, say, for example, math, I'm horrible at it. I've always been bad at math.
Same.
Science, I've always been very interested in, and I think just more of just an observing fan of science. I like reading about it. I like reading about developments. I love, critical thinking and all of that. But when it comes to sort of, I guess, what I've found that I've excelled at, it is the sort of technically creative side of the brain. So the opposite of math. So how are you approaching science in that regard? I mean, when did you discover that was something that you were particularly good with? And does that also go kind of hand in hand with other things like music, art, social sciences, things like that?
Yeah. So when I first learned that I really, really enjoyed science was when I did my very first science experiment when I was 7 years old. It was an experiment where we put a bottle of water in the freezer right before it froze, and then we dumped it out onto ice, and it turned into like a slushie. And I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah.
For a 7-year-old to see that happen was pretty crazy. And so ever since, I guess then, and a little bit before, I have really enjoyed science, and I've been quite good at it because I love to study science. I'm also really good at reading and writing.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why, but it just comes to me.
Yeah, same here. Writing's my thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Writing and reading. They're my best subjects.
How have your teachers responded to your Tourette syndrome? And did you have to have any special lesson plans or anything like that? I mean, that's something some people come up with, but what's your experience been like with teachers at school?
Well, when we go to open house, the day before school opens, I always wait until kids almost completely leave my classroom, and I go up to my teacher. My mom always texts them in advance, but I like to tell them personally what is happening. And I do have a 504 plan.
Yeah, that's it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so it's really nice to have a 504 plan because when my tics get really bad, I can step out of the room if I need to.
Yeah.
Part of my 504 plan is, well, when this year when we did my 504 plan, because they do it yearly, they said that twice a day I had to go to called a sensory room with like a swing and like toys that squish.
Yeah.
And I hated it. I hated going there because it felt like, I've always thought this, and it always had felt like I was a special need person.
I gotcha.
Because
I understand.
I had to go to this room. And so I told my mom that, and she's like, okay, I'll tell your principal. So when she told my principal, she was like, another 504 meeting, we're coming back.
Yeah.
And so when my mom came back, they decided that when I was going to have a little thing that I gave to my teacher when I felt like I needed to step outside the room. And they gave me 2 other places to go. Just walk around the hallway, because usually the hallway is not filled with a lot of people.
Yeah.
And then there's a room in the office that is really quiet, and there's never, like, almost never anyone in there.
Well, I mean, it's awesome that you're able to kind of stand up for yourself when you saw something that didn't feel like a good fit for you. I mean, obviously, no matter what your neurological condition is, or I mean, it's just whatever people have is, you know, is fine. There's nothing wrong. But what you saw something that was not necessarily the right fit, just in terms of it being a beneficial experience for you at school, and you spoke up about that, and you guys identified something that would work a little bit better. I mean, has it been a kind of a progression of having to do that? Was that the one instance where you had to speak up and say, you know, we need to do something else?
Yeah, it was hard to do that because I'm the type of person, if I speak up about something, I feel guilt because they've worked hard for me to have this.
Totally the same way.
And so I'm the type of person that feels guilt when I speak about that type of stuff.
Yeah.
And so my mom one morning asked me, how's your 504 plan going? And I was honest, and I told her what my mind was going through. And it was really hard to tell her, but my mom and my dad are always super supportive. And so they're always like, yeah, I can text your principal. They're always super cool about it. And they always give me what I need to help me through school and at home and in public.
That makes the world of difference, doesn't it? I mean, to have that level of support inside the house. I've talked to other people who, you know, they didn't have the same thing growing up. They didn't have the same level of understanding or parental support. I mean, what do you imagine things are like without that level of support in your life?
Terrible.
Yeah.
It would be so hard.
Yeah.
When I first my Tourette got really bad, I was kind of like that. I was pretty much hiding it from my parents and what stuff was like at school.
Yeah.
And they had no idea what was happening. And there was a girl in my second grade class that was a bully, and she kind of bullied me about what was happening.
Yeah.
And she just wasn't very nice to me. And I didn't tell her. I didn't tell my parents that until third grade. And
wow, yeah.
It was hard to speak up at first because I didn't know what they were going to do. Because I didn't know what the support was going to be like.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, that feeling of guilt that you're talking about is made so much easier by knowing that you do have that support inside the house. And I get exactly what you mean, to where you don't want to come off like you're ungrateful or that you have a bad attitude about the help that people are trying to give you. And you want to show that level of appreciation. And if you have to critique it or criticize it, it just sounds like, you know, at least when I do that, I'm worried that it sounds like I am not on board with it, or nothing's ever good enough for me, or that kind of thing. And so just having that backing inside your home, that people are in your corner, they're going to listen to you. They don't want to go through the trouble of doing something, you know, that might even be complicated if it's not going to work. So, I mean, it's your input that's going to help shape that and make it successful. And it kind of chokes me up a little bit, but just because my parents always gave that to me, and I felt like I maybe should have lived my life a little bit more closely to how you're doing it, because that level of support was there. They were completely behind me. Even back in the day when people didn't really know a whole lot about Tourette syndrome, it wasn't talked about much in the news or anything like that. This is back in the 1980s. But they were still there for me all the time. They did everything they could to try to explore the right path of help for me. And but I still chose to bottle it up, and I regret that. But also going back to what you said about, you know, you talk when you're ready to talk, and I would never pressure anybody with Tourette syndrome to speak out about it if they're not comfortable with letting the world know what they're dealing with yet. So it's just that process of finding that level of support. And, you know, you've found it, you've got it in your parents, but you've also found a way to kind of deliver it to the world where they can be supportive too, whether it's your friends or your teachers or people at school or whoever. And you mentioned bullies. I mean, how was that something that you've sort of personally had to deal with and kind of make a better situation? Because that's something a lot of parents email me asking, and I don't really have very good advice for them just because
Yeah.
I'm not in the same situation. How do you handle that? How do you deal with that kind of thing?
Well, now when I was in 3rd grade and I first spoke up to my class, I knew that there was going to be those people who kind of didn't like it or thought that I was different
Yeah.
and thought that I wasn't as good as them. And in 3rd grade, another girl in my class, we had been friends for a long time. And as soon as I shared that, she separated the group of 3 friends. And she took the other friend instead of all of us. And she would try to take me away from a really good friend that stood up for me and helped me through what was happening.
Yeah.
And, I told my mom, and she was like, yeah, I'll contact your doctor, because my doctor, if there's any bullying that happens or bad stuff that happens, she just contacts my principal pretty much and says that there's something happening in the school. And they talk to that person, and they talked to the girl that was doing this, and nothing happened. And so I guess it's just been a part of what's happening and turned it almost into something good, because I've learned how to deal with stuff like that. And now when stuff like that happens, I know how to deal with it. Even if it's not telling my mom or my dad, telling my teacher, I'm able to deal with it on my own.
Right.
And there's a song by Jamie Grace. She is a singer with Tourette syndrome, and she has a song called Games that it's about drama and kind of her drama at school too.
Yeah.
And how she was kind of had the same thing that I do, where kids would not tell, like they'd act like they were friends with you when you were with them. And then as soon as you turned your back away, they'd be like, did you hear her do that?
Yeah.
The little gossiping thing.
Right.
That goes on.
You've received some coverage, haven't you? I mean, I've read some articles about you online.
Yeah. I have had a story on me on the Akron Children's website after I completed CBIT.
Yeah.
And that was pretty cool. I mean, I don't like to call myself as a star or as famous.
Right.
Just because I feel like it's wrong. But then Fox 8 actually read the article, and they wanted to have me on their news.
So that's the local TV station or the local news station?
Yeah.
Okay.
Fox 8 News, Ohio. And they interviewed me, and it was really fun to have that experience. And after that, I like to send people letters of them helping me through something.
Yeah.
Like if it's a association or a single person that's helped me through something, I like to write them letters. And so I wrote the Tourette Association of America a letter, because they had given me stuff for an ability day that I went to. And I spoke about Tourette syndrome. Fuck, 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 and fuck, 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 fuck. And it was a complete surprise for me. I don't know if it was for my mom or not, but they put my letter in the Tourette Association of America website.
That's so cool.
But like I said, I don't like to call myself a star or famous, just because I feel like it's wrong.
When the TV news people interviewed you, I mean, what kind of questions were they coming up with? I imagine it was just the basic stuff of what is Tourette syndrome and what is your life like and what are your tics and how do you explain it? What do you think was the reward of doing that? I mean, did you hear back from a lot of people after the fact that, you taught me something about Tourette syndrome that I didn't know before, or?
Well, I've heard a couple things like that, but I'm almost glad that there wasn't a huge response, just because I don't like feeling being quotation marks famous.
Yeah.
But there were people that started asking more questions, and I answer them because I don't know what they're going through, and I want to be able to help them out if there is something kind of like Tourette syndrome that has gone through in their lives. And so I always help them out. But the other responses that I've had were just good job, keep going, you're incredible, you're amazing, which has always felt really nice. And I think the benefit of being on the news was just having the experience of not just being there and having the experience of being on the news, but also having the experience of what people want to know.
Right.
I've never had people come up, like, message or email my mom and say, can we talk about what this is? And it's interesting to see the question that other people have, because it's just been a daily thing for me. Fuck. It's just been a daily thing for me. So I didn't realize how interested people can be. And when I talk to people about my Tourette syndrome, or people with Tourette syndrome, like the girl named Eliana that I talked to, before the couple days, I think the day before she went and spoke to her class, I FaceTimed her. And she was super nervous. And I told her, even if people don't know that they want to know what's happening, they do. They do want to know what's happening.
Right.
Even if they don't know they want to. They want to know. And always the responses that I've gotten after telling someone are incredible.
Yeah.
So fuck.
That's so cool. That's so cool. And I know what you mean about how it kind of feels wrong, the sort of fame feeling, because it's kind of awkward. So with me, I guess the version would be if someone gives me a compliment about something, whether it's something I wrote or a photograph I took or something like that, it's weird because I don't know exactly how to respond. It's almost like it kind of, I seem to interpret it as, okay, now it's my turn to give them a compliment about something.
Yeah.
And it sounds so, I've never been good at that, ever. Even the slightest little thing, smallest little compliment of, because it comes off like praise that I didn't feel like I didn't, it's awkward and weird feeling. And I get what you mean, but I mean, were you proud of the TV, the spot? I mean, when it finally aired, do you think it did you justice?
Yeah, I think it did, but when I was there and when it aired and when we did the what they call a teaser, before they interviewed me, I felt I was excited and I was nervous.
Yeah.
But I felt bravery, but I didn't feel proud. The only reason I think the only reason I didn't feel proud was because it wasn't my decision to put it out there. It was someone else's, I guess.
I gotcha.
But I do feel proud when I speak up and when I'm the one who's doing it. My mom sometimes, my tics have been really bad and people are like, what's happening? And she will be the one who kind of tells them, oh yeah, she has Tourette syndrome. It's no big deal. And I liked that when I was littler because I was too scared to tell them what was happening. But now that I've gotten older, I think I started around late when I was 8 or early when I turned 9. I started feeling like I didn't like it, I guess, because it wasn't my decision to tell them. It was hers. And sometimes because of the people I don't even know, I don't want to tell them. And I was talking to my mom about this earlier today, and she said that as a parent, she's wondering, is she too nervous to tell them, but she actually wants someone to tell them, or is she just not telling them because she doesn't want them to know?
Right. So
I guess it's usually because I don't want them to know. But if I do want them to know, I'll usually ask her because, I'm nervous. But in the times that she does do that, I kind of feel almost embarrassed because she did that. I don't like.
The position that you're in, you've got a YouTube channel, you've been on TV, there are articles about you online. I mean, you are a good ambassador for Tourette syndrome.
Thanks.
And that's something you can carry forward. Let's pretend real quick. Let's just say that I have a daughter and she's your age. Maybe my daughter is 10 years old. Let's just pretend that. Mm-hmm. I'm kind of walking into this cold. I don't know anything about Tourette syndrome except for what I've, the jokes I've heard in movies, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
If you're of a peer age to my daughter, hypothetically, sort of what would you tell me to comfort me in terms of what her life is going to be like, what her future might be like, if all I'm worried about is, I'm going to have someone in my family who's going to have this strange disease, and I use that in quotes, and it's just that's the thought process that a lot of parents go through when they find that their child has been diagnosed. What would you tell a parent?
It can be hard at times because, I've seen my mom have the times where it's just been hard for her, and my dad the same.
Yeah.
But I would probably say be calm and try not to bring the Tourette up, because the less you bring the Tourette up, the less the Tourette is gonna the rest of the less the Tourette is gonna show up.
Right. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to hear that from you because maybe in the past 4 weeks, I've gotten maybe 8 or 9 different emails from parents of newly diagnosed kids, and they're all roughly maybe your age, 8 to 12 or 13. And that's some of their, I found your podcast. I've listened to one episode. I think I have a better picture of it, but what is my son's life or what is my daughter's life really going to be like? And hearing it from you, and that's why I think it's just really, really important to have you on the podcast and talk about it, because the people I typically talk to are at the age where they've already kind of, they're adults now and they're independent and they're always they have a different set of circumstances in their life than when they were 9 or 10 years old. So it's really valuable to have you on here as someone who can bring a different perspective than I'm able to bring and see the world in a way that even though I have Tourette syndrome too, I'm not seeing the world the same way that you are. You have your own experiences, you have your own perspectives, and they're really, really valuable. And then that sense of bravery is, I think is very important too. Not just for the sense of empowerment that it might bring, but just for the sense of possibility that a lot of parents and people who have been recently diagnosed themselves sometimes need to hear or need to see. So I got to say thank you for that.
You're welcome.
I'm looking at my sheet of questions here, and I think I've asked all of them one way or another. Is there anything that any questions I haven't asked that you came prepared to talk about, or what's on your mind?
Well, I think some of my hobbies almost have to do kind of like with my Tourette.
Yeah.
So some of these have nothing to do with my Tourette at all.
Sure.
But some of my hobbies is swimming. That actually does go along with my Tourette because it makes me calm just to glide through the water. The sense of having something rushing against my body makes me calm.
Right.
And I don't tick at all when I'm in the water.
Okay.
Unless I've had a rough day at school or on a Sunday or a Saturday. But just to have that feeling of something rushing against my body, it's soothing.
Yeah.
And it gives me calm. It makes me serene.
It seems, at least with my Tourette's and my tics, it almost seems like it's always about kind of a feeling that I'm trying to achieve. Or if I'm ticking a certain way, I have to tick the exact right way to be able to move on from it. So if I have a vocal tic or if I make a certain sound, I have to make it the exact same. I have to make it the right way or else
Yeah.
I'm going to keep doing it until it's done. And it's like getting to that place where you feel like you've kind of satisfied that with something else, I guess, and that kind of interplays with CBIT a little bit too, but I definitely have my activities where it is almost tick-free for me. I'm not thinking about my ticks. If I do tick, I don't notice it. It just kind of, it's a safe, serene, it just kind of gets what I'm trying to do when I'm ticking anyway.
Yeah.
I mean, do you have other things like that, like swimming, like besides swimming, that you found kind of gives you the same feeling or the same result?
I do. I go to a dance studio, and they have dance, they have jazz, they have gymnastics, all these things. But the main things in their show is the acting, the drama. They have acting lessons and drama lessons that they incorporate with the show.
Right.
And when I'm on stage at my show, super nervous backstage. I'm ticking like crazy. I'm super nervous. And when I get on stage, this serene feeling just covers me, and I don't tick at all. It feels like I'm ticking, but I'm not. It's just the reason that it feels like I'm ticking is because I've been ticking so much backstage. It's just it's a constant feeling
Right.
when I'm on stage. But I don't. My mom is allowed to video that acting, and so when I look back at the videos, feels like I'm ticking, and then I look back and I'm not ticking at all.
Okay.
And it's kind of strange because you would, like, most people would think that's the time that you're going to be ticking the most because you're nervous.
Yeah, sure, yeah.
But when I get on stage and I remember my lines, I don't know. I'm super calm.
Yeah. Yeah, it's something that you can kind of laser focus into. And for me, it's music. I used to play in bands and play on stage, and it was the same thing. Sometimes I would tick where I had this certain arm tick where I would tense my muscles in my arm, and I would do that once every few seconds.
Thigh.
And I have one in my thigh too. It's it kind of moves around, but when I had that with my arms, that would kind of mess with my guitar playing a little bit. But overall, I found that if I'm driving or I'm at work or I'm I would be doing that all the time. I'm not really doing it that much on stage because it feels like something I can kind of feel good about, and that. But when you said just that feeling that you have, I mean, I feel like I'm sort of there when I'm playing music or writing music or just in the process of creating. It gets me there and I don't tick that much. And like I said before, if I do tick, it doesn't really bother me because I'm not really focused on it. Same thing with, I think, job interviews with me. I've always been really, really terrified that I'm going to just ruin it for myself because I'm going to tick out the gate and they're going to think I'm strange and I'm gonna, I'm gonna blow the whole thing. But that's something where I've also noticed that I'm able to just kind of laser focus into, and I'm okay. But I can't really find much of a common denominator with that because there are other things I really love doing and I totally enjoy them. But I'll tick all the way through it. And it's whether it's I love walking, I love jogging, I love kind of exercising in that way. I'll tick like crazy when I'm doing that. But if it's something else athletic, even if it's, performing on stage or something like that, it's a tick-free zone and I can't figure that out. And maybe that's something you can figure out one day. And I mean, do you have any other goals with that, with Tourette syndrome? I mean, do you want to find the root cause of it? You want to figure out how to get a hold of it? What are your other goals in life with Tourette syndrome, whether it's advocacy and talking to other people about it or scientific discoveries or what do you hope to achieve?
Not only do I want to figure out why Tourette syndrome comes to a person, but I also want to figure out a cure for Tourette syndrome without having to use the medicine, without having to do CBIT, not getting rid of it all the way. I like to find an easier cure for Tourette syndrome that makes it go away completely. Because as being a child and having to have those experiences, I feel like for other kids, I feel like I don't want other kids to have to go through the same thing.
Right.
And I want them to have the life that they want, which is an easy, peaceful, well, maybe not peaceful, but a life without having to do something constantly.
Right. Right. Yeah,
so-
that's really respectable. It's with Tourette syndrome, the best we got now is self-acceptance. If you find that exercises or medications aren't helping you out, it's all about, okay, well, if Tourette syndrome is what I got, it's what I got, and that's how I'm going to live my life, and I'll be happy with that, and I'm going to make sure that I'm not persecuted, and I can stand up for myself, and I can do good things, and I can, I'll live the life that I want to live to the best ability that I can. And I really respect the way you said that if someone sees their own Tourette syndrome as something that is keeping them from getting to where they want to be, and they've tried all kinds of things, and they have self-acceptance and everything, but they're still kind of held back from the one thing that they've always dreamed of doing because of their Tourette syndrome. I totally respect the decision that anybody might have to say, okay, Kirami, get it out of here. If you want to self-accept and keep it and run with it for the rest of your life, that's fantastic. That's wonderful and ideal, and you don't need medication, and but giving someone at least the option, which I think is kind of akin to the doctor saying, do you want to be on medication? And the question you might have on your mind is, medication might help me, but will it help me, or will it help the people around me? And I think a better answer is, I'll go on medication because it's the right thing for me, not because it's the right thing for everybody out there in public, so they don't have to put up with my tics. It's you have a very mature way of approaching this whole thing.
Yeah, I've never wanted my Tourette to go away. Maybe when I was littler and didn't know what was coming up for me in the future. But I think middle of 3rd grade, I didn't want my Tourette to go away completely. I'd rather have it toned down a little bit, or quite a lot, to where I'm only doing my cough / tightening my stomach tic.
Yeah, I got that too.
But I don't want my Tourette to go completely away, because it would it would feel like it's not me.
Yeah.
Like I wouldn't feel myself.
Yeah, it's you.
Because I've had it for so long. I've had it since I was 2 years old. But just because I've had it for so long, it feels like a part of me. And if I didn't have it, I wouldn't be able to do things that other people do with Tourette. Like I'm guessing, this is my point of view, I'm guessing that once your tics go away, you can't really remember what it feels like to have tics. That's just what I'm thinking.
Right.
But it just wouldn't feel like it would be me.
I hear you. I mean, Tourette syndrome is not just having tics.
Yeah.
If I could push a button right now and make my most reviled tics go away, then I would do that in a heartbeat. But everything else that comes with Tourette syndrome, and just sort of what it makes of your brain and how it shapes you as a person, even for all the difficult times, I would never trade it. I mean, it is me. It's exactly who I am. I feel like I don't understand most of it, but it is who I am. And I would do the exact same thing that you would do. I would hang on to the core of it, get rid of the tics I don't like, and continue to be me with Tourette syndrome. And I remember one thing that Amanda Talty said from the Tourette Association said when I interviewed her was, you never meet a person who said, I used to have Tourette syndrome. even if they don't have tics anymore, they've lived their life having Tourette syndrome. And even if they don't even really remember what it's like to have tics or to feel the urge to tic, or there's still that part of them that knows that they were shaped by Tourette syndrome. And so it's forever with them. It's not something they used to have. And there's something kind of nice about that.
Yeah. I have a friend in my class who I'm really close to. When I told my class about my tics, after I think a couple weeks, maybe a couple months, she came up to me and said, when you talked about your Tourette syndrome, I realized that I also have tics. And her family had been searching for quite a while, seeing what these weird, strange movements and why she couldn't stop them were. And she doesn't have Tourette syndrome, she just had tics, so just motor tics. But it told me that I was, like, just inside, it felt like like my conscience said, you're doing something right. Like, this is what you're supposed to be doing.
Absolutely.
And it felt really nice to know that people really do need to hear what I'm saying.
Thank you so much for listening, Eliana. That was awesome. That was an honor. And thank you for everything you're doing for the community. This has been a favorite and, again, a first of its kind for the podcast. If you have any thoughts about the conversation, email me at tourettespodcast@gmail.com. Or, of course, take it to the discussion group on Facebook, where we have so many members now. This is great. And we're going to keep adding more if you keep telling people about the show and what it's all about. New listeners coming forward all the time. Not all of them have Tourette syndrome, by the way. I think that's important. Shout out to all the non-Tourettic people who, for whatever reason, started listening to this podcast and you're getting something out of it. That's awesome. Please write me with questions. I would love it if people who don't have Tourette syndrome wrote into the show with questions about it. One more plug for the support portal. That's patreon.com/Tourette's podcast. That's where you can throw some support to the show. @Tourette'sPod on Twitter. And I think, and we've got some other things in the works too. I feel like I say that all the time, but it's always true. I can't believe it's April already. All right, let's wrap this up and I'll see you next week. But let's talk in the meantime. Thanks again for listening. This is Ben Brown.